Hi, my name is Rick Edgeman, and I am Professor of Management and Chair of the Management Department at Forte State University. I also have a few other roles. I serve as Professor of Sustainability and Enterprise Performance at Aarhus University in Denmark, where I was previously a tenured full professor, as Honorary Professor of Engineering Operations Management in the Department of Technology and Innovation at the University of Southern Denmark, and also I serve as Shingo Institute Fellow in the Shingo Institute in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. And today, what I'm going to be talking about to you is the Shingo model. More specifically, today, this will be just an introduction to the Shingo model, to the culture, to principles, and the underlying things that lie behind the model itself. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So Shigeo Shingo, you see to the left of your screen, Shigeo Shingo was the co-developer of something that you may be familiar with if you're interested in quality management, lean, and related topics. In particular, he was the co-developer of the Toyota production system. If you really are into those sorts of topics, then you may recognize some other things that he invented. Poka-yoke, or air proofing, and also single-minute exchange of die. So the Shingo Prize is named after him. It was formed with his blessing in the late 1980s. It was first offered or first awarded in 1989 after being established in 1988 at the Shingo Institute at Utah State University. So the Shingo Institute is the shepherd of the Shingo Prize. It is where all the new development of the Shingo Prize occurs and so on. It does reside inside the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University, and that's where I was formerly professor of management and also the research director for the Shingo Institute. So perhaps the thing that Shigeo Shingo is most famous for, however, is his so-called Green Book that you see over to the right side of your screen. It was just one of many books that he authored. But in terms of lean manufacturing, it's regarded almost as a holy book, so to speak. So if we're going to be focused on quality, on improvement, on lean, elimination of waste, and so on, then it helps to know what Dr. Shingo's perspective was. And I say Dr. Shingo, he was an honorary doctor. He received his honorary doctorate from Utah State University and in fact was buried in his robe. You can see his robe there, a picture of him late in his life in Utah when he was receiving the honorary doctorate. But one of his quotes, one of his many quotes, translated into English was, "Are you too busy for improvement?" Frequently, I'm rebuffed by people who say that they're too busy and have no time for such activities. I make it a point to respond by telling people, look, you'll stop being busy either when you die or when the company goes bankrupt. And the point of that is that improvement is everybody's job. It is everyone's responsibility in an organization, and it should be done in an ongoing way. It should be in the forefront of your mind. It should be part of your general mindset, day by day by day by day. So generally speaking, the Shingo Institute offers 5 main workshops. Those 5 main workshops are intended to be set in a particular sequence, although that need not necessarily be true. However, the content of this presentation is a very, very condensed version of the first one that you see there, listed as Discover Excellence. So what is Discovering Excellence about? You see in this prerequisite to the other ones. It's about the Shingo model, an introduction to the Shingo model, its principles, and so on. Basically, it is about culture and the behaviors that lead to enterprise excellence. It doesn't mean that those behaviors alone are sufficient to produce enterprise excellence, but it does mean that they are critical to achieving enterprise excellence. After that, there are some other things that follow. Cultural enablers, which would be part of the Shingo model, 2 of the main principles. Continuous improvement, 5 of the 10 Shingo principles. Enterprise alignment and results, which would be about the last 3 of the principles. And finally, something like Build Excellence, which would help you learn how to drive strategy to execution. So what should you get out of this particular presentation? Out of this particular presentation, you should get 7 of the 8 things that are on this list. You should be able to define enterprise excellence, to understand the relationships among principles, systems, and behaviors and results, to have an understanding, a basic understanding of the Shingo model itself, that you understand some of the principles behind operational excellence, that you understand what Shingo means when that says ideal behaviors and ideal results. We will not cover any case studies in this presentation. And finally, learning how to go out there on the floor in the enterprise itself and observe what's going on and learn what's really happening, what should be happening, and how to identify and bridge the gap between those two things. That's called going to the Gemba, G-E-M-B-A, which is a Japanese word. Basically, it means to go to the place where the work is actually done. So why do organizations exist? You saw that word results floating across. Fundamentally, that is the purpose for organizational existence. It is to produce results for their key stakeholders. Now, the nature of those results may differ depending on the stakeholder segment, but nevertheless, it is to produce results, which I think of as being composed of performance and impacts. Ordinarily speaking, I think of performance as intentional results, and I think of impacts as not necessarily intentional, sometimes unintended consequences. As an example, if you engage in the martial arts, there's a good chance that you engage in the martial arts to learn to defend yourself or as an exercise form or something of those natures. On the other hand, part of learning the martial arts, ordinarily speaking, is to develop extraordinary mental focus, to extraordinary self-discipline. So those things are part of it, to develop respect, to develop humility. Those things are, ordinarily speaking, parts of the side effects of practicing martial arts and learning about the martial arts. But they're not necessarily the reason that you decided to go into and learn and become a master at some level or another of the martial arts. They're the side effects, they're the unintended consequences. That is, they are the impacts, at least in terms of how I think about it. So our organizations exist to produce results. On the other hand, the question is, how do you produce those results? And the answer to that is through tools and systems. So what is a tool? A tool is just a single device or item that accomplishes a specific task. For example, a drill. A drill is intended to make holes, whereas a system is a collection of tools or tasks that are intended to work together in a coordinated fashion to produce a larger overall result. Okay, so think of having to use a hammer, a drill, a circular saw, things of that nature that come together to help you build a house. What else do we need to drive results? The answer to that is we need people, and people are who form the organizational culture. Those people tend to be what we call leaders, managers, and associates, and we will distinguish between those 3 categories in a few minutes. But what is culture? Culture can be defined in many ways, but within the Shingo context, we think of culture as the collection of values, beliefs, and behaviors that manifest inside the organization. A simpler way to remember all of that is that it is the way that we do things around here. But what is behavior? Behavior can be observed, it can be described, it can be recorded. There are, of course, many different behaviors, but each of them have those 3 things in common: that they can be observed, that they can be described, that they can be recorded. Think about your organization. What are some of the cultural characteristics of your organization? What's something that you really like about your organizational culture that you regard almost as a best practice? Okay, what's something that you really wish, or at least believe, can and should be changed about your culture? Those are the sorts of questions that you should be considering every day. So according to Dr. Shingo, it has long been understood that our beliefs have a profound effects on our behavior. I think you and I would probably agree with that. I know that what I believe truly drives my behavior on an everyday basis. He went on to say, what is often overlooked, however, is the equally profound effect that systems have on behavior. As an example, think about your organization and think about its reward and recognition system. Well, it's generally accepted that when we look at a reward and recognition system, that what gets measured is what gets done, whether it's what should be done or not. What gets measured is what gets done. Why is that? Because ordinarily speaking, what gets measured tends also to be what becomes either rewarded or sometimes punished. So that is a typical system inside most organizations. It's reward and recognition system. And that reward and recognition system, its structures, its components will in fact guide the behaviors of people inside the organization because they perform according to that system. Who are the people that make up the enterprise culture? Well, we mentioned that just a moment ago. Leaders, managers, and associates. So by leaders, we mean, for example, corporate executives, your board of directors if you have one, the president, the vice president, those who have responsibility over a group of managers and associates and, keyword, and, provide strategic direction for the organization. Managers, ordinarily speaking, we're referring to middle-level management, those who have responsibility over a group of associates and have tactical responsibility for execution of the strategy, carrying it out. And finally, we have the associates. The associates form the largest part of most organizations. They're the people who actually do the majority of the work, that deliver the products to the stakeholders that our stakeholders expect. So they are supervisors, they're shop floor employees. They are the people who work under the directions of managers and have responsibility for the work they perform. Do they all influence culture in the same way? I think we would agree without thinking about it too hard and too long that no, in fact, they don't influence culture in the same ways. So what you're going to have, not just in this presentation, but in subsequent ones that are highly condensed versions of looking at cultural enablers and looking at enterprise alignment and so on, you're going to have a number of built-in videos. And as you go through these videos, here would be some recommendations. First, it's a good idea to, in some way, shape, or form, take notes. Probably not mental notes. Those probably won't be sufficient unless you have a far better memory than I do. Write it down. Use your laptop. Enter notes as you watch the videos. Pause the videos. Record your observations as you go. Okay, so what is the central message, the primary message of that video? Every video will have one. What are the 2 or 3 things that the video highlighted that might be or are important to you, whether that's as an individual or in your family or in your place of work? What are some specific things that you can take away with you and that you can take back to work and hopefully improve the way that things function or the way that you perform your work itself? And identify some things that you will, or at least you might consider doing differently based on what you learn. So let's go ahead and look at a first video. It's called Defining Enterprise Excellence, because there are many ways that enterprise excellence might be defined. After we go through this video, you'll see the way that I define it. Here in the video, you will see people from organizations that are in Denmark, Lundbeck Pharmaceutical. You'll see people from organizations in Ireland, for example, from Abbott Labs, from Canada, from Mexico, from the US. You're going to see a number of examples from insurance companies, from heavy manufacturers, from a steel company, De Acero, which is a Spanish-Mexican company, with activities in the US, for example. So you're going to see a lot of different perspectives on what enterprise excellence is, but mostly what you will hear in this video is how it works inside the organization that the person is happens to be at as they put forth their perspective. So here we go.
So enterprise excellence to me for the Air Force was about trying to instill purposeful change to mitigate the root cause of performance problems. Performance problems being defined as those things that stopped us from advancing the mission. Being able to mitigate the root cause of those performance problems, we wanted to embed that in the DNA of every airman, so that they could wake up thinking about how to improve their job, how to make their mission set better, how to improve teamwork and integration capabilities, so that achieving the stated mission and objectives was just a natural course of things.
So for us, for enterprise excellence or operational excellence, it's really about everybody every day, and that they come to work and improving the work is the work. That it's not just about doing your processes, it's about how you're going to improve today. And I suppose we follow the Shingo model in that respect, because we're a company that results is very important, obviously. But it's not just about results, it's how you get the results.
What truly, in my view, excellence is all about is about engaging the whole workforce in making a better company. And we managed to do that over the years. A key element of that has been employee engagement and designing our approach to continuous improvement based on getting people in there and getting them to take responsibility for the processes they are part of. When you do that over a number of years, you become excellent.
For me, the excellence enterprise is related how to create a great environment for the people, looking for the same objectives and just having fun, everybody.
Enterprise excellence is a status in which an organization has achieved not only financial or market results, but has transcended to a different level where respect for people, culture, and principles are key factors in a strategy to sustain growth over generations.
It would be that we understand what our customers' needs are. We're working with them to develop solutions to better meet those needs every day, day in and day out, and that we're relevant in the eyes of our customer and continuing to challenge what that relevancy looks like for us.
Operational excellence is an aspirational state, where we're trying to optimize the value for our customers through reducing waste, eliminating waste, and engaging our employee base so that we can have every employee delivering at their full potential and delivering as much value to our customers as possible.
I think being part of an enterprise excellent environment, it's about being never satisfied. You know what I mean? Constantly moving forward, constantly thinking. And again, no matter how you're good, I remember reading one time about this company were a top company, and they said what kept them the top company is believing they were number two. Because they felt if we start thinking that we're number one, somebody else is going to creep up behind us. You know what I mean? So I thought that was a really, really powerful way of looking at it.
You're part of an excellent organization. You're part of an organization where it's safe to challenge everything. The people you work with respect you. Your leaders are humble. Your coworkers are humble. It's a learning organization.
What's critical about enterprise excellence, at least the way that's defined with Shingo, yes, it does talk about tools, which is fantastic. And then systems, how do all these things hang together, be effective? I think what's really valuable is the focus on culture and behaviors. For our journey, that was the most important thing, was to win the hearts and minds of our people first.
Ben.
So let me give you an overview of how I regard enterprise excellence. I regard it a little bit differently than the individuals that you saw in the video. And again, you saw a broad array, and in future videos you're going to see people from additional organizations as well as some of the ones that you saw in this particular video. So I tend to look at integrated excellence, or sustainable enterprise excellence as I refer to it more generally, as having four primary dimensions, each of which has particular elements to it. So first, excellence should be sustainable, should be resilient, should be robust, and excellent. So what does it mean? It means that an organization that is characterized by sustainable enterprise excellence will have those four characteristics to their activities, to their results, to their strategy. So what do we mean by sustainable? By sustainable, we mean that an organization is sustainable to the extent that it's able to create and maintain economic, ecological, and social value for itself, its stakeholders, society at large, and policymakers. So for those of you who may have heard of something called a triple bottom line, you will notice the three main elements, people, planet, profit, that are sitting in this particular description of sustainable. So people, that we are maintaining social value for the organization, for stakeholders, for society at large, and policymakers. Planet, ecological value, and profit, economic value. So those would be the three traditional bottom lines, if you will, of the triple bottom line. So we have a common saying, you know the common saying, we've all used it, that what's the bottom line? And ordinarily speaking, when enterprises have talked about what is the bottom line, they're referring only to financial results, financial performance. The triple bottom line says there's more that is important than just financial performance. Not that it's unimportant, but that in fact there are additional things that are important. And that includes the social performance and the environmental performance of an organization. But remember that when you say bottom line, you're talking about what comes out the end of the pipe. The question is what comes before the end of the pipe. And in most organizations, what that means is that they have a set of guiding principles. Those guiding principles inform their strategy. Their strategy is then deployed through things like people, processes, principles, partnerships, and so on. And after they are deployed, after that strategy is deployed, then you will have the performance and the results. And then what most organizations do that are intent on becoming better is they review all of their relevant strategies, performance, processes, and so on. All of those things, all the relevant ones, and they do that on a routine basis. They do it on a routine basis so that they can hopefully accomplish the same thing that you would look for when you go to see a doctor. When you go to see a doctor, you want to know two things usually. How am I doing? And how do I become better? So in the same way as we examine those things as an organization on a routine basis, we're trying to develop insight into our current performance. How did the strategy work? We're trying to develop foresight in terms of what can we do better? How can we do things better to achieve better performance in the future for all relevant stakeholders of the organization? That is a key part of an organization being sustainable, because else it's going to be very difficult to create and maintain that economic, ecological, and social value. The organization should be resilient. You're familiar with the concept of resiliency. Every one of us has probably bounced a ball. And from whatever height we drop the ball, the amount that it recovers, that proportion that it recovers is a resiliency factor. Well, in an analogous way, organizations have some level of resiliency. It is the ability that they have to bounce back from particular types of shocks and challenges in their system, ordinarily through innovation. So it's their ability to self-renew through innovation by adapting their responses to shocks and challenges over time. Equally, organizations need to be robust to some level. Robustness and resilience have some commonalities, but there are some distinctions between them. Many of us, if you're an adult, know what robustness is. Because many of us, if you're like me, will have a scar about the size of your thumbnail, probably, that'll be sitting on a shoulder. I can feel mine under my shirt right here. Okay, and what that scar is it is a smallpox vaccination. So I am immune from smallpox, having had that vaccination. Many adults are. Smallpox has almost been eradicated from the face of the earth. On the other hand, many young people no longer receive a smallpox vaccination, so that if in some way, whether as a biological weapon, whether as just somehow, some other way, smallpox made a return, many young people would be vulnerable. So What is robustness? It is trying to make the organization immune to the deepest extent possible from some of the most critical shocks and challenges that they may face. And lastly, the organization needs to be excellent. So when we're talking about excellence, excellence is what lies behind, let's say, some of the alternatives to the Shingo Prize. The Shingo Prize is the Shingo Prize for Operational Excellence. It is a global prize. America's alternative to that overall is the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. Now, the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award has a little bit different emphasis than the Shingo Prize. Nevertheless, some of the ideas that you're looking at on the screen right now would be in both the Shingo Prize criteria and model and in the Baldrige Award criterion model. And the same things would also be present in the EFQM Excellence Award principles and model. So the EFQM Excellence Award is the European Foundation for Quality Management Award, and it's European-wide. So those are the three main awards actually around the world. It would be the Shingo Prize, the Baldrige Award, and the EFQM Excellence Award. There's another one out of Japan with a much longer history that is also revered but is very different, the Deming Prize. So when we say an organization is excellent, what we mean is it's excellent when its governance, leadership, and strategy, as executed by or as deployed by or through people, processes, partnerships, and policies, delivers superior performance and impact in specified areas. But remember, they need to do so sustainably. They need to create and maintain that value. Okay, so when we say specified areas, however, which areas are we thinking about? There are a number, just a partial list of which would include the following for most organizations. Enterprise human ecology, that is, its human resource. Innovation, financial performance, social ecological performance. In data analytics and intelligence, that's more or less important depending on the organization. Supply chain management, similarly, that can be more or less important depending on the organization. Those are among the many interrelated areas. So we look at customer performance, customer satisfaction, customer retention. We look at those sorts of factors. We look at employee retention and satisfaction as important factors. So when you're looking at this last line of that definition of excellent, and it talks about superior performance and impact in specified areas, those are just some of the specified areas. So you're looking at part of the Shingo model right there. Results, systems, tools, culture at its heart. But what you might be able to see from some of the definitions that you heard or perspectives on enterprise excellence from the individuals in the video and from the definition that I provided you just a moment ago is sort of the notion that if you want to have ideal results, they require equally ideal behavior. Now, Shingo has a particular perspective on what ideal results are and what ideal behavior is, and we'll get to that. But for now, let's just say insight one is that ideal results require ideal behaviors. Now, your behaviors are a major part of your culture in any organization. Remember, beliefs, behaviors, principles, values. And Lou Gerstner, who is the former CEO of IBM, said, I came in to see in my time at IBM that culture isn't just one aspect of the game, it is the game. A quote that you won't see in this presentation, but that is, I think, equally enlightening, comes from Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker was the father of modern strategic management. The father of modern strategic management. And even Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So important is its role in any organization. So you can imagine that it's really important to build a healthy culture that helps drive eventually the sorts of performance that the organization would like to deliver to its key stakeholders. So if that's insight one, what is insight two? There are going to be three of them. Insight two is that somehow we need to be able to produce that behavior. Purpose and systems drive behavior. And what guides us toward ideal behavior? Insight 3, principles inform ideal behavior. So what you see now in the center of this particular screen is you see essentially the Shingo model. Okay? It begins with culture at its heart. Organizational culture is at its heart. But remember that guiding principles are so important. Guiding principles inform strategy. Strategy is executed through processes, through systems, through tools, policies, partnerships, and so on, to eventually produce performance or results. Okay? And you see all of those things that are sitting in this model right now. So if we start at the top with guiding principles and work clockwise around the diamond, we see that guiding principles align systems to help us select the tools that are best used to produce or achieve the results that we ideally want to deliver to our stakeholders. And that becomes a self-reinforcing circle or cycle. Those results then affirm that our guiding principles are right. Now, let's start at the top and work our way back around in a counterclockwise fashion. Starting with guiding principles, those actually drive the sorts of results that it is that we want to deliver to our customers, to our key stakeholders. Well, when we see those results, we see whether or not they fall short or whether they match what needs to be provided, whether they match our vision, so to speak. And so seeing those results will then help us refine the tools that we determine to use and the way that those fit into systems. So they refine the tools help us enable the systems, and the systems drive the guiding principles deeper into the organization. They help us more deeply embed the guiding principles into the organization. So that's the basic understanding that you should have of this particular model. The Baldrige Award will have its own model. The EFQM Excellence Award will have its own model. They all work fundamentally in similar ways, however. So we've talked about behavior. Well, what about behavior? Behaviors can be observed, they can be described, and they can be recorded. So Mark Twain, for example, long before the Shingo Prize was ever created, said that kindness is the language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see. So now I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you 3 options. I'm going to do this twice. I'm going to ask you which of the 3 options represents a behavior. Essentially, when you say that a behavior can be observed, can be described, then what you're saying is that a behavior is an action, an observable action that produces some sort of particular result. So here are 3 options for you. Which of these would you say is behavior? Our associates know our mission and vision. Our associates understand our mission and vision. Our associates talk about our mission and vision at the beginning of each meeting. I think that you would agree that the only real activity that's clearly observable from among these 3 options would be alternative C. That is, that our associates are able to talk about our mission and vision at the beginning of each meeting that they have. How about these 3 options? Our managers are confused with what is a priority. Our managers come in early and stay late. Our managers are angry with all of the special projects. I think that you would probably agree with me that the only truly observable result that we have there is option B, that our managers come in early and they stay late. Now, we're not supporting that necessarily as an ideal behavior. So our managers may come in early, they may stay late. That may be rewarded inside the organization, but it could be destructive, for example, inside the family. So we're not necessarily providing this example as an example of ideal behavior. Only an example of what is behavior. It is observable, can be described, it can be recorded. So I'm going to ask you quickly, maybe not so quickly, as a takeaway, as an exercise for yourself. We can all predict behaviors. We can all predict behaviors because we have experience ourselves with behaviors. So when we say predict behaviors, what sorts of behavioral evidence would you observe if your enterprise culture, or your societal culture, or your family culture promotes hunger for power or firefighting? What do we mean by firefighting? We mean essentially that you're not looking for permanent remedies to the problems that crop up, that arise. You're only trying to take care of the problem in the immediate. So that is firefighting as opposed to prevention. So hunger for power, firefighting, survival, fear. So many of us have been in organizations where fear reigns. What sorts of behaviors have you seen in that sort of environment, or might you see in that sort of environment if you don't have direct experience? All of these would be negative behaviors. All of these would be negative cultural elements, and you're predicting probably negative behaviors. Well, what about some positive behaviors or affirming behaviors? So inside your enterprise or your family or your society, what behavioral evidence would you expect to see? What behaviors, actions, would you expect to see if that culture promotes trust, humility, respect, innovation, collaboration? What might you see? Because there are particular types of behaviors that are positive behaviors, and they carry with them some real positives. Okay, some performance positives, some respect positives, all those sorts of things. Here are just a few, and you can see the website or a website where you can learn more about those in just a brief read, listed beneath this particular list right here. Smiling, laughter, kindness, confidence. You're a good listener. You understand nonverbal cues. What might you see? So here's an observation from Edgar Schein, professor of management at the MIT Sloan School of Management. The only thing of real importance that leaders do is create and manage culture. If you don't manage culture, it manages you. And you may not even be aware of the extent to which this is happening. Remember Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Most of us would like to think of ourselves as being highly strategic. On the other hand, being highly strategic, at least according to Drucker, the father of strategic management. So that's not enough. The culture in which that strategy is embedded will rule over the strategy and its outcomes eventually. So here's what we know. We know that principles drive enterprise excellence because principles drive behaviors. Principles and systems drive behaviors. Now, most of us are used to, in our organizations, talking about KPIs, whether we use that language or not. Key performance indicators. Usually those are financial indicators or operational indicators. What we're less likely to be familiar with, and less comfortable with for that matter, would be KBIs, or key behavioral indicators. Because consider that, generally speaking, it is the behavior, the action, that drives the performance itself. So on the KPI side, key performance indicators, normally we have tools, and those tools produce certain results. On the KBI side, we're expecting to produce a sustainable culture of excellence. Okay? That's got as its support structure principles that deliver particular type of results that we measure with key behavioral indicators. But what's in the middle? What helps us get from tools to that sustainable culture of excellence? And the answer is behaviors. So what are KPIs and KBIs? Vocabulary, key performance indicators, key behavioral indicators. What are those? KPIs tend to be tool-based performance measured in terms of financial and operational measures. KBIs, those are systems, those are behavior-based principles. So, what can we observe about principles? What are they? What do we know about them? First, principles are foundational rules that help us see both the positive and negative consequences of our behaviors. And that fact enables us to make more informed decisions, specifically about how it is that we choose to act. What do we say about principles? That they're universal and timeless. They apply everywhere all the time. In scientific language, we would say that they're ontologically invariable. They're self-evident. We can't invent principles. We can discover them through research and study. Think about, for example, gravity. And I'm not going to say that gravity is a principle, it's a physical law, at least. But is it self-evident? Well, it was. Okay? You sit under a tree and watch an apple fall, you're seeing the effect of gravity. Now, how many people before Isaac Newton, you've heard the story, Isaac Newton sitting under an apple tree, apple falls, he says, aha, gravity. You believe that story? You should. It's essentially what happened. But then think about what was going on. There was an informative event. There was information content in an event. That event was that the apple fell. And you had an informed observer there to see that event and to try and extract from that event its information content, its value. You had Isaac Newton sitting there who had studied, who was informed, who was prepared, and so on. So when he saw that apple fall, he said, aha, gravity. But how many people before Newton watched an apple fall or a pineapple fall from a tree or a coconut or a rock fall off a cliff and never said, aha, gravity? So what we try and do these days is we try to exercise the scientific method, intentionally provide the opportunity for an informative event to occur, and when it occurs, to have an informed observer or team of observers there to learn from the information content of the event. So what are principles? They're universal and timeless. They're self-evident. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're easily discovered or easily observed. Sometimes it means we need to be prepared to see. Okay. And beyond that, they govern principles. It doesn't matter whether we understand them or not. Okay. We are subject to their consequences. It does not matter whether we understand gravity. If you jump off the top of a tall building, you're going to understand gravity at some point in time. And if you don't, it'll be too late. So you are subject to the consequences of gravity, one way or another. Now, we had an insight. We said that ideal results require ideal behaviors. I guess we need to understand what it is that we mean by ideal results and what it is that we mean by ideal behaviors. And it's not quite what you might imagine. At least that's the likelihood. So what are ideal results? Those are results that are aligned with the organization's purpose and its strategy, with its guiding principles. Okay? Results that are aligned. And they're excellent, and they are sustainable, and they demonstrate improvement over time. So notice that excellent is not an end place at which you arrive. Otherwise, we wouldn't have said that they demonstrate improvement over time. So excellent is a temporary stopping place, but better always lies ahead. So we're always striving to become better still. Ideal results, results that are aligned, they're both excellent and sustainable, and they demonstrate improvement over time. What do we mean by ideal behaviors? This is probably where you will look at this definition and say, well, that's not what I would think of as ideal behavior, and that's okay. This is just definitional in the way that the Shingo model and principles regard what ideal behaviors are. They are actions that create outcomes that produce results that are both excellent and sustainable. Now, that doesn't mean that there might not be better behaviors. But it does mean that these are more or less best practice for now, until we can find better ways to behave in the future, to produce even better results in the future. So here's the Shingo model. You've seen it before. And now we're going to blow out, let me back that up. We're going to take this diamond at the top, guiding principles, and say, what are the principles that underlie the Shingo model? The principles that underlie the Shingo model, there are 10, and they fall into 4 dimensions. Those are the 4 stripes that you see going across the model: the blue, the rust-colored, the yellow, and the green stripes. Cultural enablers, that'll consume 2 of the 10 principles. Continuous improvement will take another 5. Enterprise alignment 2. Results will take the 10th and final principle. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't other principles out there that are reasonable. It doesn't mean that all of these are unique to Shigeo Shingo. In fact, there may be that none of these are unique to Shigeo Shingo. That isn't the point. The model is named after Shingo. The institute is named after Shingo. The principles are essentially gathered from whatever sources are reasonable to support that objective of sustainable enterprise excellence. So in fact, within one of these, you're going to see a principle that many of you will recognize: W. Edwards Deming, the guru of all gurus, in my opinion, in quality management. You'll see something that he was famous for. Okay? So Shingo himself, though, said, think in terms of categorical principles. And you see the 4 categories or dimensions: cultural enablers, continuous improvement, enterprise alignment, and results. Those are called dimensions. Each dimension with multiple principles, except for results, which is just one principle. So we have a people dimension, we have a process dimension, a purpose dimension, and a dimension that is for our stakeholders, although within the context of the Shingo model, ordinarily speaking, you will see stakeholders referred to as strictly customers. But it really is a broader categorization than that. So let's see what we've got. What do the cultural enablers accomplish? They demonstrate respect. They develop people. Okay, those 2 principles will be lead with humility and respect every individual. What about continuous improvement? Continuous improvement provides a framework and problem. Oh, there it goes. A framework for problem solving, problem prevention, and innovation. Enterprise alignment, with 2 principles: create constancy of purpose and think systemically, aligns and unifies the enterprise around a shared vision and common purpose. Now, I neglected to mention quickly the 5 principles of continuous improvement: flow and pull value, assure quality at the source, focus on process, embrace scientific thinking, and seek perfection. We'll be talking about all of these principles in more depth in a moment. And finally, with regard to results, we're talking about delivering socially, environmentally, and economically responsible outcomes to enterprise stakeholders and affected parties. Ordinarily speaking, in Shingo language, they say create value for the customer, but we're going to be a little bit more comprehensive in our view than that. So let's get a video for you. O.C. Tanner is, in my mind, one of the single best examples of a company that really applies, really understands the Shingo model. And if it wasn't the Shingo model, they'd be exceptional at other ones. Okay, O.C. Tanner, you probably are not familiar with them. They created and provided the Olympic medals for the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics in the early 2000s. Fundamentally, they focus on reward and recognition. And you're going to hear from one of their vice presidents, Gary Peterson, who I respect greatly. I've had the opportunity to tour their plant in Salt Lake City. They have other plants elsewhere. I've been able to do that a handful of times. And what he says in this video about their people, their understanding, their execution, is, at least according to my observation, absolutely true. So let's see what Gary has to say.
This is our strategy wall, and it helps communicate the way we show our people what really matters and what they can do to contribute to the overall well-being of the company. And it all starts with the principle statements. These are principles that we've gotten from the Shingo model, which means an awful lot to us. We put them up here in the white words, and these are the principles that our people really connect with. Lead with humility, respect every individual, assure quality at the source, seek perfection, create constancy of purpose, those kind of ideas. These are bedrock for us. And in the black letters here, we've kind of written a description of what we mean by the principle. And I'm convinced that you go on.
Now, I'm pausing this for just a minute to say something that I think is really important. You see the 10 Shingo principles in the white letters that Gary Peterson is referring to right now. But if you were to look at the black letters, the words in black on that particular sheet, and then you look to see what the Shingo Institute says about those things, you'd see that they're not the same. That's an important observation, because what O.C. Tanner has done is what is precisely appropriate to do, which is to take those things, those 10 principles, lead with humility, respect every individual, and so on, and contextualize those for your organization. What does leading with humility look like? What should it look like, ideally, at O.C. Tanner? What does respecting every individual look like, or how should it look like at O.C. Tanner, and so on. So don't regard this as a template that you should just copy in its entirety when you look at what's available through the Shingo Institute and its model and the principles and the descriptions. Instead say, how should this manifest in our particular organization? Contextualize things. You'll always get more out of things if you do it that way. Oh, sorry, I need to go back a little.
This is our strategy wall, and it helps communicate the way we show our people what really matters and what they can do to contribute to the overall well-being of the company. And it all starts with the principle statements. These are principles that we've gotten from the Shingo model, which means an awful lot to us. We put them up here in the white words, and these are the principles that our people really connect with. Lead with humility, respect every individual, assure quality at the source, seek perfection, create constancy of purpose, those kind of ideas. These are bedrock for us. And in the black letters here, we've kind of written a description of what we mean by the principle. And I'm convinced that you go on the floor, you talk to any employee here, I don't know that they necessarily rattle off the principles, but you talk to them about respecting individuals, they'll know what you're talking about, and they'll feel about it the way that we've written about it here. And we try to reinforce this because again, we find this is foundational to all of the things that happen. So having the principles, then we decide, well, what is it that we need to have in place in the teams, on the floor, throughout our organization, so that we can support these principles. And that's where we come up with the systems, creating the systems. Like we have a coaching and training system. Not surprisingly, the coaching and training supports this idea of respecting individual. It teaches people how to embrace scientific thinking. It helps them understand the importance of seeking perfection. It reinforces constancy of purpose. All the different systems help us accomplish the principles. That's why they exist.
Okay, so let me give you a quick and dirty view of how I regard the principles fitting together. So I look at the principles as a system of principles. Every organization exists because it needs to produce results. If it doesn't produce results, it doesn't stay in existence, because no organization has enough fuel to go on forever without producing results that are valued in the marketplace or valued by its key stakeholders. So we're going to start with the 10th principle, and then we're going to build toward that. So we're starting with the end of the pipe and saying, how did we get to the end of the pipe, or how can we get to the end of the pipe? So we're going to start with the cultural enablers. The cultural enablers are respect every individual, every individual in the organization, and lead with humility. Fundamentally, what those imply is that no one in the organization knows it all. Everyone has valuable contributions to make, and you should recognize that you don't know it all, and you should recognize that other people are making valuable contributions. In fact, everyone. So respect every individual, lead with humility. Until you've done those two things, you have not earned the respect, the authority, the reputational authority, the authority of just people looking at you and saying, yes, I trust in this person. Maybe not to make every decision in the best way, but I trust in this person to lead us. So that third principle, after you've earned that trust, after you've earned that respect, after you've demonstrated yourself to respect every individual and to lead with humility, is to create unity of purpose and shared vision. So we don't necessarily mean that everybody in the organization is going to buy into its purpose and vision. But what we do expect is that you should be able to get a critical mass of the organization's human ecology behind that purpose and behind that vision. So we can move forward with that critical mass as an organization to try and accomplish great things for our stakeholders. Once you have that purpose and vision around which you unite, then you can think and act systemically, that is, in a way that manifests throughout the organization, to fulfill that purpose and vision. Helping you do that enables you to embrace critical and scientific thinking. In the Shingo model, they would just say, embrace scientific thinking. But it's really critical and scientific thinking. Those things have some nuanced differences between them. So think of scientific thinking as experimentalism. You're willing to make some changes and see what happens. But the critical thinking is the thinking that says, okay, I see that I made changes, I see some differences in results, but what's the real mechanism behind that? How do I understand this? How do I make sure that this happens every time, or that it doesn't happen in the case of poor results? So embrace critical and scientific thinking. It's very much like in psychology, perception and cognition. Okay, perception is that you recognize that there's a change. Cognition is you understand the mechanics behind it. Okay. Not unique to the Shingo model, in fact, it's in most quality models, is a focus on processes. I think that's the wrong focus, by the way. So I don't believe that we focus on processes. Instead, we focus on systems. Because systems are composed of processes, multiple processes, ordinarily speaking. Sometimes each process working to the best of its ability doesn't provide the single best working system. Sometimes you have a process that has to sacrifice for the good of the system. As sort of an example of why this doesn't work. In the late 1990s, 1997, 1998, I lived in Denmark for the first time. I was at the Aarhus School of Business in a unit called the Quality and Innovation Research Group. During my time in Denmark in 97, 98, there was an Italian soccer team. And they gathered truly the best soccer players in the world to be on that team. They had a payroll, and this is now closing in on 25 years ago, a payroll that was about $250 million US. Far exceeded the payroll of any other soccer team against which they competed. They were in the elite league. And they performed very poorly. And the reason that they performed poorly is because all of those excellent pieces, think about those as excellent processes, didn't fit and work together well. They didn't form a good system. It was a disaster, an economic disaster that was an embarrassment on the field because you had all the stars who weren't willing to subjugate themselves for the good of the team. Okay. So focusing on process is great. It does mean that we're trying to make the process operate efficiently and effectively and produce the best that it can at the best rate possible and so on. But it's really the system that supersedes the process. So yes, focus on processes, recognizing that the processes themselves fit together to form a bigger system. And it's the system that truly needs to be optimized in its performance. Seventh is assure quality at the source. What that means is never knowingly pass on a flaw or an error. Don't make that the next person's problem. When you see the problem, work on it yourself, calling colleagues or collaborators if that's what needs to be done to correct the problem that led to the flaw in the first place. Assure quality at the source. 8, flow and pull value. I think maybe the simplest way to describe this one is that what we try to do is never produce except according to actual demand. Not wishful thinking, not anticipated demand, but actual demand. Now, most organizations, maybe 99.999%, cannot produce according to actual demand unless they're a highly customized shop, made to order. Okay? But the closer that we can come to that, the better, because there are certainly some implications for things like inventory. How much do you have on hand and so on. Now, this doesn't always work for the best interest of everything happening. What do I mean when I say it doesn't always work to the best interest of everything that's happening? Sometimes things happen that are so large and so great that they can upset your entire system and lead eventually to a new normal or some new reconceptualization and construction of your model and the way that you behave. As I'm recording this, the COVID-19 pandemic is raging. And with the COVID pandemic raging, what we are seeing is that we're in too short supply of some critical things. Test kits, ventilators, masks, all sorts of things. So it isn't always that we want to run on zero inventory or inventory 1. Sometimes there can be penalties in taking these things to extremes. The question is, what is the severity of the penalty for taking these to extremes versus what's the benefit of taking these to extremes? There's always a risk-reward, a risk management aspect that goes into any sort of system. And that's one of the things that can go into flow and pull value, although I've used maybe the most extreme example that I can imagine. And 9 is pursue excellence. Notice it says pursue, it doesn't say achieve. It says pursue because excellence is an ever-moving target. It's always out in front of you. You're never quite there. But we want to do everything that we can through the execution of the first 8 principles to chase after excellence with great vigor and to produce exceptional results for our stakeholders. So what are some of the critical areas of focus that we see? Okay, well, what we see is essentially this. That leaders should be spending about 80% of their time on culture, if you will, on reinforcing the guiding principles. On the other hand, what we see is that managers, generally speaking, should be spending about 80% of their time in the results and systems category, across the middle. Okay, and you can probably guess that we're going to say that associates should be spending about 80% of their time working on the tools. It doesn't mean that they don't contribute to culture and systems and so on. Obviously, they help drive the results, but their time is working on tools. These are the areas where they focus. Okay. Every one of those categories has 20% more that's distributed across other areas of the model. So let me give you just a little bit of example of a couple people and their statements about these sorts of ideas so far. Taiichi Ono indicated that Shigeo Shingo was the co-developer of the Toyota production system, which many of you will probably know, at least in passing. The other developer was Taiichi Ono at Toyota, and Shigeo Shingo was his mentor. So he said, without constant attention, the principles will fade. The principles will have to be ingrained. It must be the way one thinks. It must become part of who you are, and hence part of who you are corporately enterprise wide. And then Akio Toyoda, the CEO of Toyota and grandson of Toyota's founder, said it was as if we were engaged in car manufacturing in a virtual world and became insensitive to vehicle failings and defects in the market. Think about the safety bag, the airbags problem that they had in some of their cars. Think about some of the problems they had otherwise. Now, Toyota is an excellent company, and they produce high-quality vehicles. But what he's saying here is we weren't paying enough attention to the thing that made us great. We always have to work at these things. So here's an exercise for you. Choose one of the 10 principles. Doesn't even matter which one. Choose one of the 10 principles and predict the consequences of living it, pursuing it with great rigor, and the consequences of ignoring it. Next, we're getting toward the end of this particular presentation. The remaining presentations that deal, for example, with cultural enablers will all be much more brief than this one. Go to the Gemba. Go to the place where the work is actually done. So what I think of that as is curiosity with purpose. The purpose is to become better. The purpose is to identify what's actually happening, compare that to what the ideal might look like, to identify the gap between those two, so that you can formulate the strategy necessary to close that gap, whether it's close it completely or close it predominantly, but to close that gap and hence become better in that way. But the best way of doing that is not to sit around and theorize. The best way to do that is to go to the place where the work is actually done and see what's being done. Go to the Gemba. So now you've heard about Shigeo Shingo. This is his son, Ritsuo. Ritsuo is a good friend. He himself occupied several high-level positions at Toyota, in China, in the UK, in the US. Now he consults around the world. So he's retired from Toyota but consults around the world. I've been to many Gembas with him, and here's what I can tell you. When myself and others are almost done with the Gemba, we're walking away almost, he's back near the beginning, standing, observing. His insight is incredibly keen. His training, he's not an engineer, he's not a scientist, he's an accountant by training. So you don't have to be from any particular discipline for these things to be useful to you or to become an expert in these things. But you do have to have or to develop acute observational powers. Listen carefully to what he says. He's got some really nuggets that you need to listen to here.
My name's Ritsuo Shingo, and I'm from Toyota City in Japan. I used to work for Toyota more than 40 years. My definition of Gemba is the place where the actual thing is happening. That is Gemba, not necessarily plant. And why the Gemba is very important is almost everything is there. Problem, improvement matter, many things are there. So without knowing Gemba, just in the office, how come you find the problem or improvement area without knowing Gemba? No. So even if you are in the meeting room and calling many people to have a meeting without seeing Gemba, in most cases, in my opinion, it doesn't work. You should go to Gemba, where the actual thing is happening. Is the most effective way to grasp the fact and find the problem and find the improvement area. Even a Toyota, like a quality manager, he should know what the Gemba is. But knowing is one thing. But actually implementing, doing is another. So even at Toyota, we are losing a good attitude. So even basic concept of Gemba, he doesn't understand. You should have a very big eye. That means you should watch carefully. And you should have a big ear. That means you should listen to very, very carefully, but not big mouth. So that always I was saying to them. So the leader should be a very good listener. If you talk too much to the people, they just listen to, and they just try to do what you say. No, the opinion from the workforce, or Gemba people is the best way to know the fact.
Now, you're about to go to the Gemba, or at least let's assume that you're about to go to the Gemba. You're at a plant, you're at a company, you're about to go see where the work is actually done, some area of that plant or company. You should go there, at least if you're working in a Shingo context. You should go there fully aware of what the principles are, the 10 principles. You should go there fully cognizant of what those 3 insights of enterprise excellence are. So those things should be sitting in your mind. Now that's important because of what you're going to see next. Okay. What you would be doing as you're going through the company, and maybe not you, maybe you're going as a team to evaluate the company or the plant and how it performs, or some area of the plant. So it says work through each principle. Well, at least collectively as a team you're going to do that. You're probably going to have at least 2 people on each principle. Okay? List the behaviors you actually see relative to each principle. List the systems that you see in place, good, bad, or indifferent, for each principle. Identify what ideal behaviors would look like, and identify what ideal systems would look like. Because by comparing actual behaviors to ideal behaviors, by comparing actual systems in place to ideal systems that could be put in place, you identify opportunities for improvement in the organization where the organization can make greater progress toward enterprise excellence, and hence greater progress toward creating value for the customer, results, or more broadly, creating superior value for stakeholders. So you're about to go to the Gemba, go in there with all of this information on this slide that's sitting in the background. As you go out there, remember what the purpose is going to be. The purpose is going to be to examine the principles, because those principles are supposed to inform ideal behaviors. So when you're asking questions of the people that you're talking to, it isn't that you're just looking at things. You are talking to people and listening to what they have to say, looking at what they have to show you, and not talking too much yourself, okay, except for clarification purposes. Not to make suggestions, not yet. Okay? That's not your place. It's to listen with those big ears that Shingo talked about, or that Ritsuo talked about, and to watch with the big eye that Ritsuo talked about, but not to speak. So to have a little mouth. Big eyes, big ears, little mouth. Okay? But you're asking questions at the place where the work actually happens, at the Gemba, so that you can identify evidence of actual behaviors of the people there who are doing the work, okay, whether those are leaders, associates, or managers. And then the value is, once you've done all this thing, to look at the difference between actual and ideal systems and behaviors both. So it isn't what we say or think that define us, it's what we do. Jane Austen, Sense and Sensibility. So these are just some tips. Go to the associates, start a conversation, make it friendly, Ask them what their title and their role is so that you have better insight into what it is that they're doing and maybe should be doing. Ask them what it is that they do there. Just engage them in conversation. And then ask them questions like, well, when such and such a thing happens, what is it that you do? Okay, what happens next? Can you tell me a little bit more about? How did that make you feel? So you're probing and you're going progressively deeper as you do these things. So as sort of an example, you'd be looking at a principle. Let's say respect every individual. What should that look like coming from a leader, from managers, from associates? So maybe from leaders what an ideal behavior would be, not the only ideal behavior relative to respect every individual, but what would be an ideal behavior? Well, maybe it's something like this. Leaders always acknowledge and recognize the specific behaviors they see that are close to ideal. Okay, so in other words, they're reinforcing respect for every individual by recognizing what's going on that's positive. What do managers do? Every manager makes certain that large group meetings begin with a safety briefing, let's say. Okay, why? Because if you respect people, you care about their safety and security. You care about their health. Okay, so through starting with a safety briefing, you're making sure that people are doing what they need to be doing, behaving in the way that they need to behave. That's what doing means. So that their safety is best ensured, and the safety of their coworkers, and the security and their health. What might associates be doing as respecting every individual? Well, maybe what they do is they say, oh, we really want to learn these new skills. We're going to take initiatives. We're going to share our learning with others because we respect them and think that they can benefit from something that we've learned. And again, that you can benefit personally from something someone else has learned. So maybe they construct a newsletter, let's say. Okay, that'd be a system that would support that ideal behavior. So you're going to ask yourself, as you're going through these sorts of visits, what's an ideal behavior? And then what was the actual behavior I saw? What are some systems that either do or might support that? What systems did I see? What are some tools that might support those things? And what did I see? So if you're talking about, let's say, leaders always acknowledge specific behaviors they see that are close to ideal, well, then the recognition system would do that. If managers are starting with a safety briefing, then, well, a safety system would do that. If associates are looking at demonstrating eagerness to learn new skills, okay, communication, sharing of best practices. What are some tools that might be put in place for each of those? For the recognition system, recognition events and appreciation cards. For the safety system, maybe new safety equipment or proper safety equipment. For tools, communication tools, maybe newsletter. And then we're getting to the very end here. Most of you probably don't know the company Autoliv. Autoliv produces airbags for vehicles. They're an exceptional producer of airbags for automobiles. They did not have the problems that Takata had. You're going to see an individual here who is going to talk to you about what the culture is like at Autoliv. Now, this person has since left Autoliv and is now a consultant, basically consulting along the lines of what Shingo does. But he has an excellent message, and Autoliv lives the way that he describes. So I'd say this is a longer video. It's about 5 minutes, and then we're basically done. Pay attention to this video.
Here at Autoliv, understand that we are in the perfection business. I mean, we get paid for saving lives. We make life-saving devices that every day are the difference between someone being able to walk away from an accident and maybe not so. And so when we look at what drives improvement, we need to look at sustainable improvement. because we're talking about perfect performance every day. And every day we challenge ourselves to be better than we were the day before. How do you do that? You do that by reaching deep into people and by linking with values that drive their behavior. And the basis for those kind of values are principles. We try to grab one of those principles and we embody it in our motto that we save lives. Every day we come to work and we save lives. We're in a very tough business. In the automotive business, if you don't improve, you don't exist. With every person that comes in that door, we have these multi-dimensional capabilities. And our job as management is to create and sustain the environment that fosters those abilities to be expressed as improvement ideas, expressed as them developing their workplace so that it is owned by them. Now, in a role as one of our top managers, my job is that we keep focusing on those things that will sustain our ability to add value over time in a better way. In business schools, you might be told, you have to drive lower cost by lower overhead or lower labor costs or lower material costs. Well, all those are great, but you don't do those directly. You do those through investing in raising the skill and the ability of your people. And if you do that and do it well, then they do all those things and they do them better than you would know how to do because it's their house. It's their job and they do it very well. So as management at Autoliv, our job is to hold up those principles that sustain their behavior on a daily basis. And as we do that, as we are seeking perfection through employing their ideas every day in the workplace, by showing that we trust them, by implementing their ideas, we are then in a position to accomplish the goals of the business. Save more lives every day by implementing the ideas of our people. And by doing that, we all win. You can operate in the short term by just pursuing results. And you can get results in the short term, but it's a sugar high. It doesn't last. It's not sustainable. And so what it degenerates into is a program. Just another program. But the way we do it, through investing in our people and sustaining the culture that we have, by doing that, we invest in our future. We invest in the future of our people, and we grasp that future and make it our own. Basing improvement on principles is a long-term perspective. It is looking beyond the horizon. Basing improvement on anything other than principles is by its very nature finite. It cannot sustain itself in the long term. I measure success by the light in their eyes. When you see the spirit through the eyes, and that spirit is dynamic and vibrant and on fire, what else do you need to see?
So walk away with the Shingo model. Remember that it looks like this, that it, at its core, would always be enterprise culture, but that its goal is to produce results. Results for its key or critical stakeholders. It does so through tools that are organized into systems. But every organization needs guiding principles. The guiding principles, and there may be many more that an organization uses, but if they're embracing the Shingo model, then they are looking at the 10 that are in these 4 so-called dimensions. cultural enablers, continuous improvement, enterprise alignment, and results. That cultural enablers has 2 principles: lead with humility and respect every individual; continuous improvement, 5 principles: flow and pull value, assure quality at the source, focus on process, embrace scientific and critical thinking, pursue perfection. Enterprise alignment as a dimension has 2 principles: create constancy of purpose. Oh, let's get out of there. So create constancy of purpose and think systemically. And finally, all of that is to derive results, where Shingo would say create value for the customer. What we're looking for instead really is to create value, sustainable value for stakeholders, broadly speaking. All of this generates 3 insights of enterprise excellence. We need ideal results, and we get those through ideal behaviors. How do we get ideal behaviors? What drives those? Purpose and systems. Principles inform ideal behaviors. So that is the end of this very long first presentation related to the Shingo model. This more or less would be a condensed version of what would be, normally speaking, a 2-day workshop with 1 day spent on the plant floor, going to the Gemba. So the other presentations will be somewhat shorter, but they will also each be based on the equivalent of a 2-day workshop, discussing the same material, where always a day would be reserved